So Imogen Learmonth and James Hutt, you are editor-in-chief and you are a consultant at Thread Media, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we might get into it a bit, but I'm helping support Imogen and like outreach into the businesses and partnerships we're working with.
Okay, cool. So the first question then, really general, do you guys just want to explain what Thread Media does for people who aren't very familiar, I guess, from the kind of creative side and from the business side?
Yeah, sure. So from the creative side, we have a publishing arm, and it is an online publication, mainly thread.com, where we post articles and videos. We also have a production wing of our publication arm that makes videos, generally entertaining videos based on article content that we've created, and that's also housed on YouTube. We also have a lot of social media that we engage in, all under the name of Thread as well, quite big Instagram, and we're on Twitter and all that. But yeah, mainly we are a news source for Gen Z by Gen Z. So we try and stay abreast of news topics that might be relevant to the younger generation, and we try and kind of be as informative as possible on things we feel are pertinent and relevant to the future generation. So things mostly like social change oriented, which I know is a bit vague, but think climate change, think like social movements, democracy, protest movements, things like that. And also, technological development. We have a whole section on our website under tech, basically just like trying to look at the news at large, or just social trends from the perspective of young people and how it will affect society in 10, 20, 30 years. Because generally, I mean, I think a lot of news sources like the BBC or The Guardian, these big news sources, they can't always guarantee that a lot of their demographic will be caring about what happens to the world in 10, 20, 30 years, because maybe they will be dead. So yeah, the whole idea behind Thread is like the future matters to us as young people. So we focus on that.
And the business side?
So the business side, I guess, has grown up really to make sure that we can keep doing what Thread magazine does so well. We think of ourselves as a social enterprise, but that means we've got to grow up as a business as well. One of the things that we have learned through the development and getting to know NZ as a cohort, I guess, is a good way to think about them, is that like not only are their voices not getting out there, not only are they not being represented by, hesitate to use the term mainstream media, given who normally goes about that, but not only are like the BBC and the Guardian not representing what they're interested in, but that's coming the other way in, like brands, movements, communities, unless they're really Gen Z focused and Gen Z led, are failing to understand what young people of today want as well. And so we're seeing, like, you see lots of brands making missteps, you see advertising campaigns that are just a bit crass or uncool. The consulting side has grown up to work with those brands we think are mission aligned, that we think are doing things for the future of society as well. We're not going to go partnering with anyone, to provide consulting, to provide advice on brand positioning, and to like really make sure that Gen Z's voices get a say in their decision making. And so that's how the business arm or the consulting arm works.
Okay, so
basically help the magazine keep running.
Okay, yeah. So Thread Media seems to be fairly unique in marketing itself of being by Gen Z for Gen Z. That's kind of your central policy. Is that something that obviously you guys weren't the people who founded it, but you sort of saw as a gap in the market, or is that something that you think needs to exist like in society now?
Yeah, so I think definitely in media there was a real sense of either you had this like really, really facts-based, super unbiased news source, or you had a super biased news source that had a really like set demographic either way. And neither of these avenues people went down really had a particular age demographic. And I think in that sense that we did kind of think that there were, the mainstream media, maybe we should think of a better way of phrasing that. It was kind of sidelining a lot of young people and not talking about youth issues. So for example, one thing I found is that like development reporting, so reporting on, so I'm the change writer. A lot of our writing is also it's not always news focused and super heavy. We have a lot of entertainment news and a lot of articles that are fun and about about Gen Z and about young entrepreneurs and about business and things like that. But I'm the change writer, so obviously that's usually where my my tangents go. But you know, for example, a lot of like humanitarian reporting would focus on development goals and kind of ignore ecological factors. And I think a lot of Gen Z felt that the environment and, you know, biodiversity harm and things was being really ignored by the mainstream media, just because it wasn't, these media sources were run by people who didn't grow up immersed in those narratives, and it just didn't come to them naturally as a sort of lens through which you should really look at all news. So in that sense, I think the real like stakeholders of the future-based reporting were being sidelined and weren't really being talked to or marketed to. So yeah, I think we did recognize a gap in the market there, and Gen Z. A big thing about Gen Z is they were kind of moving away from these like BuzzFeedy, hype beastie types of, because in a way, like BuzzFeed still markets itself as a news source. They were moving away from that because they kind of were in, particularly 2020 is a great example. We're in a time and a place where we feel our future is uncertain and threatened by these really prevalent social factors and ecological factors, and you know, we're in a worrying time, and people wanted to migrate away from those kind of fluffy news sources, but they didn't really feel like the traditionally more serious media sources like the BBC, for example, were talking to them. They were talking to an older audience and not really discussing their concerns necessarily. So yeah, I think that was the gap that we saw, and we really thought that there would just be room for Gen Z to talk to one another and like actually not pander to each other and not you know, not be talked down to, but to have things explained to them in kind of a way that made sense to them.
Yeah, and so a lot of young people these days tend to just go straight to social media for a lot of their news. What role do you guys see yourselves playing in that? So obviously you've got some social media presence. Do you want to participate in that, or are you offering a slightly more not traditional, but a slightly less social media based kind of news source for young people to get?
Should I take this one? Okay. Okay. So I think again, a big thing about Gen Z is that they're really tech savvy, and they want to be able to go to places where they feel that they're being spoken to on a level, but also they're not being introduced into purely doom narratives. So I think definitely we have a lot of news on our website, but also on our website there's YouTube videos, and our Instagram we try and adapt to the platform in the sense that we also post videos that we find funny and engaging. I think recently we've been trying something where we've been posting our articles as tiles on Instagram in sort of like short form, and sort of maybe once every like 3 tiles we'll try that out. And we also so yeah, in Instagram I think we take slightly like lighter approach to every social media has its own discourse and its own vibe, so we try and match that. But I think actually one of the most valuable things for us when it comes to social media is being able to engage in a community. So we do a lot of work trying to bring attention to Gen Z creators, whether that be, you know, entrepreneurs in business, or whether that be you know, creators in, you know, gaming or YouTube, or you know, young people making waves generally in social change, so young climate activists, etc. And quite often they rely on social media a lot for their following, so it's really great for us. We write articles on them, we profile them, we do exclusives, but actually in some ways the most helpful thing for them that we can do is to profile them on social media, where we can tag them and we can sort of cultivate their following, and we can also, you know, take the following of, say, a climate activist doing really great things in Australia and New Zealand, and we can introduce their following to someone in Iceland who's doing something similar, and we can kind of really help to grow that movement through social media, because obviously social media is such a crucial part of advocacy and of you know, movements when it comes to young people. Anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say there's another thing that like makes this a great time for a new Gen Z focused media brand to be coming up, is that like we are not burdened with a bunch of legacy technology or legacy ideas. Actually, it's a platform that's being built with the idea that like Gen Z consumers are multimedia. They will expect to be able to engage with you on Instagram as much as on your website. And so we've looked to be across multiple different platforms, as Imogen says, like adapt to the different style each of those platforms need, and then to provide space where people can actually talk and get behind some of the stories, start to meet other people. Like, we ultimately are a resource. We are there so that the community who are interested in this, which is a staggering proportion of Gen Zers, are able to meet and are able to learn from other movements around the world. So we've set up a Discord platform, which we will be starting to invite people to in the coming weeks, which again is envisaged as a space where, like, if you want to discuss climate change and how your movement is getting on in Australia and New Zealand with someone who's done something successful in Chile, we want to be a space where people who are linked by age and linked by interest can meet to discuss that.
That's really interesting. So you've got a range of platforms. You also, as we've, I guess, touched on, you offer a range of services. So you do your consultancy, you do media, you do journalism, you do publishing. Is the plan, are you planning on keeping all of the arms that you've got going on? Are they the plan for the foreseeable, or is there one part of, like, your website, thread.com, is that the main kind of arm of Thread Media that you want to see that ultimately is the priority, or is it everything that's going on now you want to be keeping doing all of those?
That's one for you, James.
So I think, like, what we want is an ecosystem that's growing up. And I find it very, very hard to imagine a world in which thread.com is not the central tenet of that. But who am I to say? Like, look at how much things have changed in the last 5 years, 10 years. If there's one thing that I think would make us stand out as not in touch with Gen Z, it would be pinning our mask to a single channel of delivery. I think what is essential to what Thread is doing is making sure that Gen Z's voices, Gen Z's stories, and the reality that they're facing around the world is what's being presented. And currently we think that the best way to present that is on a website that can bring together all of the different channels we're doing that, and a website where we can engage with our audience such that we're able to then understand them, understand what they want to see, and advise brands who are trying to do the right thing. Now, is the mechanism of delivery going to change over the next 5 or 10 years? Potentially. Ethos of building a resource and building a community so that we can help these movements grow as people in Gen Z come of age and all become, on the scene of public conversation. Yeah, it might change, but for the moment, community and that educational aspect are the central tenet for sure.
Okay. I think as well, when it comes to the publishing side, at least, obviously journalism is a central node of what runs the heart of the publishing side, but we're kind of exploring different ways of communicating within journalism, because again, I think print journalism, even in that including, online sources, is potentially going to evolve. So we've been fiddling with, journalism via our YouTube videos, and we've got animated videos that kind of try and explain aspects of articles we've written in a multimedia setting, and I actually find them really, really engaging, and I think Gen Z do as well. I mean, obviously with the rise of things like TikTok, they've really signaled that they want this digestible content where they don't necessarily have to sit down and turn off all the other sources of media around them and engage entirely in words on a screen. I think this idea of them wanting visual media as well is something that a lot of news sources are not incorporating into their journalism, and so that's something I think we're really trying to explore, how to kind of talk about these narratives that are important to Gen Z in a way that engages them and in a way that's interesting and new.
Yeah, no, that sounds really great. So again, kind of long term, you presumably aim to keep your website like thread.com. Presumably you want that to be, free to view in the spirit of what you're doing for Gen Z. What's the plan to make that sustainable? How are you going to be a sustainable business? You touched on this a little bit before, but I guess if you want to just go into what your long-term plan is to provide a free service that Gen Z people can use.
Sure. So I think there's various models that have started to evolve in the media ecosystem. And those might be paywalls, those might be ads. And as you say, been kind of unsatisfactory, and they're certainly not the ethos we're going for. We can't think of many examples of a community, certainly not a community that's accessible to a wide range of people across the world, where you're having to pay to get access. So I think it's fairly, we're fairly comfortable saying that a paywalled service is not what we want to do. That's not what we want our journalism to be, because that's not how you build a community. Equally, running ads is just a horrible experience as a reader, as a viewer, as a listener, particularly when those ads feel non-native, when they feel out of place, when they feel like they're really not fitting with the ethos of the site. So that is why we have been trying to build up Thread as a sustainable social enterprise from the get-go. And what expertise do we have? Well, I encourage anyone who's watching this to check out the website. We have a lot of great writing on there, and the reason we have great writing is because we have writers who are living and breathing this space all day, every day. They're speaking to members from Gen Z, they're speaking to activists, they're speaking to members of movements who are making change around the world. One of the things we want to do is to grow that writer base. And one of the things, again, to anyone listening, is like, that's why we want to come to Oxford. It is home to some of the brightest and best writers in Gen Z who are already passionate about this stuff. Involved, like, we've got ample opportunity to grow this community of writers around the world. And we build that community, we're learning, we're using experts, we're using people who are on the ground. And that expertise is valuable for a lot of people. That expertise, we think, is more than enough to be able to keep the publishing and community side of the business going.
And also, we're really planning on extending that network of writers into the global sphere. We have this model that we're hoping to move forward with eventually, of remote writing, and whilst we're based in the UK now, we're hoping to kind of cast that net out even wider, because I think the era of reporting that has sovereign borders is over. I think there's a lot more that Gen Z have in common with one another in a global sense than they do necessarily with people that live in their county or their state or even their country. So I think, again, we could keep coming back to climate change, but I think it really is like the best example of something that is so important to our generation in a way that it is just not applicable to other generations. That's important to every single young person in the world, and every single young person in the world pretty much is worried about it and knows about it and wants to communicate about it and wants to integrate thinking about it into their future, and to know as well that other people are thinking about it as much as they do. So for that reason, I think like that global community we're hoping will only grow, and that community of writers and activists and thinkers, people who just want to think about the way that we could tackle these issues moving forward. We're hoping it will be a really global community.
So that is interesting then, because you're run by Gen Z people. Your staff, I'm guessing, is largely people around your age, fairly young adults. What kind of working environment is that like? What does that create?
Well, an interesting one.
We should probably say in the time of COVID, the working environment is largely our bedrooms in our parents' houses.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I've been working at Thread for nearly 2 years now, and I think one of the funniest things is when I think this applies for working at startups in general. Obviously, we've grown a lot since I started there, but it's been a process of evolution, as all evolution is. But I think like being really thrown in the deep end. I mean, in things like hiring, like I never really hired anyone before, but when you kind of start a Gen Z company and are involved at the beginning of a Gen Z company, you have to kind of look towards building that group of Gen Zers. So I think like having people interview you that are your own age, and then having to kind of call people your boss that are your own age can be a bit funny for some people. But I think it's like the way forward when it comes to industry. I mean, we're kind of older Gen Zs. We're at the peak of this new like wave of Gen Z entering the workforce, and I think we're all kind of trying to find our feet at the same time, but also we all have the same values, and we all kind of, I think it's really important to not, there's a lot of like social revolution, I'd say, going on in the workspace right now, or in just like the work field in general, when it comes to things like flexible hours and work-life balance, that I think perhaps a lot of older generations maybe aren't so akin to. So I think it's really, really nice to work in an office where everyone kind of has those values and has the value has places importance on getting the work done, but not at the expense of anyone's, well-being or whatever. And also places value on getting the right work done, so prioritizing the kinds of work that you get done. But yeah, in general, it's just a really fun place to work.
Okay, and then your remote writers then. So that's a really interesting concept. They're not quite freelance writers. They are your writers, but is the idea there so that you don't just have all one experience, is not concentrated in a kind of bubble in your offices? You want to be people with experiences all over the world. Is that what you're trying to do?
Totally, yeah. So actually, eventually we want on the website to be able to get like in author profiles to get people geotagged, so that you can be really specific about who's writing what and where they're coming from. And from that sense, even our Discord server has like different chats from based on location. So I guess in a way that kind of so the Discord chat in general is predicated on the idea that Gen Z has at large the same interests, but obviously in order to bring about change when it comes to the actual experiential practicality of the things that we care about, these things do need to have like some sense of locality. So our Discord server will have, you know, country chats, for example, and those will be open to people that are writing for us from somewhere like India, but also people who are reading their stuff and kind of generating thoughts on it. And you know, we're hoping something like that could even morph into actual activism on the ground. You know, why not have a remote writer from India write something about climate legislation in Jaipur, and then that snowball via our Discord server into some kind of protest or movement or activism on the ground there. So that's the real idea that we have when it comes to this like remote system, is that like we just kind of want to cast our net and then let people kind of take it from there in a way, because our entire business model wouldn't work if we didn't believe that Gen Z were fundamentally activists and really wanted to you know, do something to further social good.
A phrase that gets used around the office quite a lot is like global reach, local feel. And one of the things we've noticed with social change movements that are going around is how they can tend to grow in one space, and then they end up on this almost like global conveyor belt. We'll end up with, I guess a great example is the period poverty movement, which really grew in significance in the US, is now showing up in China. And those movements are being adapted for the local environment. They're being run by local leaders, but there absolutely is inspiration being drawn and empowerment drawn from people all around the world. And that, like, we've just written an article on it, and what like a great way of showing exactly what thread is there to try and help bring more of. There are people who believe in the same things, united by the challenges they're facing, united by their age, who are able to draw inspiration from each other, education from each other, and ultimately like have those successes built from the ground up.
I'm just going back to the Discord server that you were chatting about a little bit before. I'm going to try and pin you down to something that try to make a prediction that you would well be wrong about now. So we're in a time when traditional platforms, social media platforms like say Facebook and YouTube, there's growing levels of discontent among young people with those kind of established platforms that are unhappy with the way they run. Is Discord a platform that you see as one that's, I mean, it's quite big already, but is going to get bigger? Are there any other platforms that you think they're on the way up that you want to be kind of focused on now to invest in? Well, not invest money, as in invest your kind of focus in.
Great question.
Yeah, good question. I definitely think Discord is growing. I think as like gaming at large, which I suppose you could think of as the parent of things like Twitch and things like Discord, and has really facilitated their growth, is becoming a massive arm of culture, I think, in a way that a lot of people didn't foresee. And obviously it's kind of breaking those bounds of just being related to gaming. And now, I mean, our Discord server has nothing to do with gaming. So I think those have really expanded beyond what their like initial usefulness was. So I think those are two. I don't really know how we'd get involved in Twitch, but definitely Discord I think is definitely on the way up. I think things. I think YouTube will adapt. Personally, I still think that YouTube is going to be a big part of culture moving forward, at least in the next 5 years, because I think creators there have a lot to say, and I think actually if you do look at the metrics of YouTube, it is growing year on year. Yeah, I think as well you have like private, more like encrypted messaging servers as people are getting a little bit rightly worried about privacy. I think maybe on the cards for us is potentially moving forward with like WhatsApp groups and things to facilitate people that kind of want that like encrypted service. Yeah, I mean, as James said, it's tough to kind of make predictions on these things because you know, even tech experts can't, but hopefully we'll be able to kind of adapt. Our platform and our ethos and our like mantra we think is adaptable, and we think like the ideas that we have in terms of global community do really fit in with social media however it manifests. So we're hoping we can be, you know, quite plastic in that sense.
I think the trend you identified is absolutely spot on though, Elliot. Like the generation who are turning 18, becoming adults now, are probably the most aware in history of the like purpose and the actions behind the surface of companies. Like it's something we 100% subscribe to as well. Like this year is probably the first time we've seen something like the Stop Hate for Profit movement really reach the mainstream and start to impact Facebook. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of future consumers and current consumers looking at what companies are doing, looking at what the like real crux of their business model is, and then deciding whether they want to be involved or not. So Discord, I think, is like very much caught the zeitgeist at the moment. We think it's pretty cool. We think it's a good space for talking to people who actually share your interests. But that's an issue that lots of companies across every single sector are going to be facing, not just technology, in the coming years. And we think that like Gen Z-led company is probably the way to help sort that out.
So I've just got one last question about Thread, and then I want to talk a little bit about you guys. So it says on the Thread website that you're committed to diversity, equality, social responsibility, and values like that. Is that something, in terms of the content that you produce, is that something that you've identified is not adequately represented in the mainstream media, to, again, use a much maligned term? And also, how is that manifested in what you do, not just in the content you put out, but like in your ethos as a company?
I'm just thinking about that one, sorry.
Okay.
I think looking towards diverse representation and representing multiple perspectives is something that is really endemic to Gen Z, and therefore endemic to Gen Z journalists and Gen Z employees in a way that it isn't typically, I would say, in other people. So I think just the very fact that we constantly are seeing, you know, movements galvanize around diversity issues, and like in our own cohort, and our peers are getting involved in that, as are we. I think like having a news source where that is like a central tenet of not only like the way that we run our business, the way we all run our lives, is really important. And you know, it's obviously not a guarantee. Just because you're young doesn't mean that you're, you know, woke. But generally, I'd say it's a good indicator, and you're definitely not going to be working at a social change magazine if you're not. So I think in that sense, like, it's really important to kind of recognize your limitations as an authoritative voice. So I think one thing that we really try and do is try and look at certain, so we have like a type of article that we write, which is kind of like a you decide article, where we look at issues and we kind of really try and investigate them and remove our authorial voice from those articles in order to kind of give a really unbiased but detailed and really interrogative depiction of, you know, a certain social issue. You know, for example, stuff like what we were talking about with tech, should tech platforms, you know, take a step back from like roles in privacy and things like that, or like do they have like an authority from a business standpoint to, you know, like run businesses the way that they are because of their bottom line and things like that. So I think from that sense, like we try and really like make sure that we don't ever consider ourselves like a definitive authority on any of these things. But I think, yeah, I do think there is like a gap in the market when it comes to trying to like interrogate things from like a standpoint of like, well, maybe we don't actually have the answer, but maybe it's still worth nutting it out, you know?
Okay, no, that's really interesting. So just before we finish, I want to talk a little bit about you guys, because it's not flattering to say that you guys are doing jobs that lots of students these days want to do. I just want to ask, in each of your cases, was this kind of thing something that you always wanted to do? You wanted to work in like media, digital media, and did you do things at uni or after uni that kind of you think took you to where you are now?
You go first, James.
Sure. So absolutely not, I guess. I would say that I am someone who's learned through uni, like after uni. It's one of the great things about like actually the undergrad community I was part of was how these conversations were had, and you could like continue to change what you were doing. So my background absolutely wasn't in media. It also wasn't in social change. I was working for a few years after I graduated in the finance sector, and grew like pretty dissatisfied with that pretty quickly. I knew that what I wanted to do was go and use the skills that you get taught at uni, use the skills you pick up at a corporate employer, go have some more meaningful impact on the world. That's probably why I've ended up on the consulting side at Thread. I don't think Imogen would ever publish anything that I'd written, not without editing about 85% of the words. But there's definitely space for that. People who, you know, have decided actively this is what they want to do, rather than it having been a calling the whole time along.
Yeah, well, so I studied English, so I suppose moving into journalism is not like a huge leap. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're kind of looking for like my like pathway to get here, I think it's tough because like no one's pathway after uni is ever particularly straight, but I would say moving from uni into work life, you do realize how much there is outside of your subject. So, I studied English and now I'm a writer, but you'd be surprised how little intersectionality there is between what I learned at uni and what I apply now. I would think the most valuable thing I really did since graduating was read outside of my subject and suddenly start, reading about social issues and, humanitarian issues, which are now, the bulk of what I write about, which are like current, issues in international relations and politics that were just not a part of my degree at all. So yeah, I think like you do just get really set in certain like verticals and ways of thinking when it comes to your subject, obviously, because you're studying one or two or at most three things that are all probably going to be mostly related for 3 years. And I think it's hard to kind of imagine the world outside of that. So I think it's really valuable to make sure that after you graduate, you kind of interrogate other disciplines and other even other areas of academia just to see what else is out there. Because that's definitely what I would consider my job now is kind of more as like a human rights international relations reporter than someone who just uses words.
Cool. Well, that's really interesting. I'm sure you're both very busy, and I'm running out of time on the Zoom call, so I'll let you get on with your days. But thank you very much for your time.